Hi, I'm Tina Huang, founder and CTO of Transposit. But before I started Transposit, I was a software engineer where I had to be on call for lots of different production services. I started my career in 2001 at Apple, working on the application frameworks team, following my first true passion, building for developers. I was then fortunate enough to join Google in 2005, where I got to witness the rise of SRE. Back in those days, SRE was a really limited commodity, so you had to earn your SRE through runbook coverage. And then at Twitter, I built and ran a number of high-scale production services. It's crazy how we all have these war wounds from being on call. I still remember one of the first times I was on call for Blogger. Back then, Blogger ran on Windows machines, and yet our development was all done on Macs. And so it wasn't until the first time that pager went off that I realized I didn't even know how to open up a Windows command line. And then another time I was on call, I checked to see that you could view the blogs, but I forgot to double check that you could actually post updates. The next morning, I went into the office and my boss was livid. Blog posting was down all night long. And yet, there was almost no documentation telling you how you were supposed to verify that the site was up. You were just expected to know. He pretty much brought me to tears. All of these experiences, they really fueled my passion for building systems that reduce the need to rely purely on human intuition. At Transposit, we're attacking this problem, but doing it with a very, very holistic approach. At the core, we evangelize something very simple. How do you turn all of that institutional knowledge into codified processes? And the specific philosophy that we take is human-in-the-loop automation. But first, I'd like to set the stage with what does it mean to have downtime in 2020? As we're all painfully aware, COVID has changed our lives in almost every way. As we bunkered down, businesses all had to turn digital for the first time. We basically took 5 years of digital transformation and compressed it into about 6 months. But as demand for online services boomed, so did incidents. One sector hit hard was education. Students and teachers were struggling with how to start with remote learning, and they turned to Zoom in order to be their remote bridge to each other. But one Monday morning in August, Zoom went down, and it didn't come back online for almost 4 hours. Almost all tech companies, including mine, have gone fully remote during the pandemic. This means we are more dependent than ever on platforms like Slack and Microsoft Teams. But in May, Slack stopped sending messages for almost 3 hours, destroying tons of productivity. Then, in August, for more than 4 hours, Gmail users couldn't send emails, and many other apps in G Suite were also inaccessible. Only a month later, it went down again. And just a few days ago, Microsoft 365, including Outlook Mail, Word, Excel, and Teams, were hit with a massive outage. And the list goes on. These services are more critical to our functioning than ever, causing higher demand, which is a good thing. But this increased usage often leads to more incidents. The next major outage isn't a question of if, but when. Through the rest of this presentation, I'm going to walk through a bit of history of how Agile and the rise of SRE methodologies have changed the landscape of what it means to have an incident. Then, the fundamental challenges of running a modern incident management process. We'll talk about some of the shortcomings of the traditional approach to automation. And finally, what I call data-driven human-in-the-loop approach. So how did we get here? From the development side of things, the last decade has been all about Agile and the shift to continuous integration and deployment. But as we are maturing in that practice, we are realizing that it brings with it new challenges on the operations and process side. I was recently talking to an analyst at Gartner who commented how most companies are still riding the high of continuous integration, but they're about to feel this massive pain because they haven't yet created processes to make observability and reliability sustainable. A lot of people focus on SRE as the answer, but really, SRE is a specific title. Whether you have an SRE org, you believe SRE is a role, or you just believe that reliability and resilience are important, what I'm about to describe is relevant to you. I come from a software engineering background, so when I first approached reliability engineering, I really thought of it as engineers who just specialize in infrastructure. But then I stepped back and thought about what does it really take to be a good SRE? The first is lots of domain knowledge about infrastructure, but they also need to have lots of ability to automate through building tools. They need to understand what it takes to create good processes. But most importantly, they need great intuition. They need to have that full context of their production environments all in their head. And not just the production environments, but organizational context. Who do I go to and in what circumstances? And they also need generally good intuition about risks and trade-offs. And when we think about the impacts of Agile, it's easy to focus on development and ops, but when we talk to customers, the problem is intricately tied to customers and customer support. When I was talking to my CEO, Devani, about this a while back, I was reflecting on my experience at Apple. At Apple, we ship box software. But what did that mean? It meant we had months between releases. That meant we had long bake periods for software hardening.